Hello and a warm welcome to another Grow Together Food and Medicinal Gardens episode. In this episode, we've got a lot to get through. I'm going to give you an update on what I've been doing at the allotment in preparation for my experiment with the Korean natural farming methods. I'm also going to be showing you a technique I'm using for growing seeds without plastic pots, as well as showing you how to prevent fruit trees from flowering too early, and something really shocking I've learned about garlic, of all things. So if you're not familiar with Korean natural farming, basically what that is working with nature and copying what nature does, but just aiding it. So for example, we're always told that you should never leave the prunings that you've taken from the previous year's crops in the soil, that they contain disease and you've always got to take them away from the site and burn them. But with Korean natural farming, you think, well, that plant, say for example tomatoes, your tomato plant has grown up, it's taken all those nutrients out of the soil to become a tomato plant, so therefore it makes sense to leave those leaves to rot down, because everything they've taken out of the soil then gets put back in. So if you think about it, that's exactly what nature does. Nature doesn't do crop rotations, it leaves things in place. The leaves die down naturally, all the nutrients go back into the soil, and all those leaves over the years start to build the soil. Now, there is an awful lot to doing the natural farming. If you read this book, for example, it is absolutely packed full of various tips and tricks and ferments. You go to an old forest and you collect some leaf mould, and because that will be absolutely chocker with really beneficial microbes that are native to your region, that kickstarts all the solutions that you're going to make. Now, this is quite hard going. Well, it's not hard going, but it's an in-depth book. There's a lot here. So what I recommend instead is that you go to the Garden Like a Viking YouTube channel, and Nate Murray will teach you everything that's in here in little 10-minute videos, and he is an absolute godsend. I've learned so much from his channel, which is why I recommend him in nearly every single episode. And I actually do as he tells me, which is very rare for me to do, as I'm told, because he's got the knowledge. So although I'm going to introduce you to what I'm doing, I'm not going to teach it, because I think it's much better that you learn from someone with the experience. So I'm going to point you to Nate's videos whenever I'm doing one of his techniques. But if you're new and you don't want to be making up lots of ferments to feed the soil and help the microbial action, then there is a simpler method. And for that, I recommend these two books. This one, probably, if you've never done vegetable gardening before, or you're wanting to get more productive, Gardening Without Work, The Lazy Gardener's Guide by Ruth Stout. This is a brilliant book. And yeah, she's a very sassy lady. I like her writing style. She tells it as it is. So this is a really good book to get you going, because it's very simple. She just does two things. Basically putting down a manure and then covering everything in hay. And I can attest to how brilliant this method is. Last year I did potatoes and tomatoes with this method. I moved house, I didn't have time to do any watering, no feeding, nothing. And I got brilliant crops as a result of just doing a good mulch. Now, to help myself learn about these methods, I've gone through all of Nate's videos and I've put the links to each video in date order, so basically a year planner, because the information is brilliant on his channel, but it's when you're new, it's like, oh, what do I do first? So I made a little calendar basically, so I will share the link to that so you can download it, so each month you know which preparations you should be making. And you know, Nate knows I'm doing this, so I have his permission, but it just helps organise the information. But this is another one of my favourite books. In fact, I think I prefer this book to this one. This one contains all the knowledge that you need to know to get a good soil in the first place. But once you've built the good soil, looking at all the links and all the videos that Nate's done on the Garden Like a Viking channel, you're constantly doing something or spraying something. And for me, I'm a bit of a lazy gardener. I prefer just to set things going and then not do too much. But I want that knowledge of what to do if something does go wrong. But for what I'm aiming for is this, growing semi-wild vegetables, just letting them do their thing, and I love this book. He makes it so simple. So if you've got a larger plot of land that's sort of a small holding to a mini farm, this book is brilliant. I mean, it's worth reading this anyway, because this moves on a little bit further from the Ruth Stout book. So it's, yeah, highly recommend this book. So let's go over to the allotment and I'll show you the very start of my setup in order to do the Korean natural farming.
So as you can see, it's not the most attractive of setups, which is why I've got it at the allotment, not in the garden. So I've got my compost bin for my leaf mould, 2 water butts and a little water butt to make compost tea, and 2 large fermentation tanks. Those are to make the JDAM natural fertilisers in. And they're just second hand, they were £12 each, and they used to be used for storing orange juice in. And then I've got various 5-gallon buckets and other large storage containers to do other ferments, etc. in. Now, another thing that Nate has introduced me to, and this is the thing I'm probably most excited about so far, is something called a soil blocker. I had no idea these things existed. And basically all you have to do is pack them full of compost, quite a moist compost. You just push them down a few times and then you press them out and you get these perfect little squares that you sow your seeds into. And the advantage of using soil blockers, well, there's many actually, but you don't need any plastic pots other than the seed tray just to house them in. So that's fantastic. And what this does is when you sow each seed in, because it presses down and creates a little well where you put your seed and then you just sprinkle a little bit of soil on top. And what this does is it helps you avoid the transplant shock, because when you use a plastic pot, once the seedling has rooted, the roots keep going round and round the pot, and then when you come to plant it, it stresses the plant. Whereas when there is no pot, the roots naturally find their way out and go, oh, air, okay, I'm going to not grow any further. So it automatically self-regulates the plant from actually becoming root bound, and it just goes down instead. So then when you plant them, they get away much quicker. And then for something like tomatoes, you can then, I've got 2 sizes, so I've got the medium and the large. So once they have outgrown this little soil block, then I will pop them into the large one before I eventually plant them out either into the garden or into the polytunnel. Now, my seedlings are looking a little bit stretched, so I've now jacked them up and moved them closer to the light source, because the problem with buying such a tiny grow room, mine's only 2 foot wide, the powerful lights that you need tend to be 3, 4 or 5 foot. So it's having something this tiny, it's proving quite difficult to light it properly. So I'm hoping that moving everything closer to the light will stop the seedlings becoming too leggy. And if it doesn't, I'm going to have to take them out of here and move them over to the window. But it's the perfect environment for germinating the seeds, because everything's on a timer. The extractor fan, the heat mat is got a thermostat on it, and the fan, everything, and the lights, everything's on a timer, so I really don't have to do too much.
So the other thing I've just started is I've got a fruit tree arrived. My father bought me a lovely Victoria plum tree, so I'm very grateful to him for that. So I dug a big hole, I put some manure in the bottom of it and topped it back up with the rest of the soil. I've got a really good soil here because I worked on it a lot last year. And then I've made sure that I've put a mulch on it. Now the mulch is really important, because fruit trees in the wild, they'd be surrounded by grass and whatever is growing in that native environment. And what the grass does, it acts like a mulch. It stops the sun beating down directly on the soil, because one of the main triggers for plants to flower is the temperature of the soil. So if the sun's beating down too early and the soil warms up too early, then your fruit trees are going to flower at a time when there probably isn't as many pollinators, and also they're at a high risk of getting the flowers destroyed by frost. So you can either grow orchards, certainly in the Korean natural farming method, they have grass growing all along their orchards, so that acts as a shelter. But if you've got somewhere that you don't want grass growing, then hay mulch or a bark mulch. Now, you've got to be a little bit careful that the mulch isn't touching too high up the tree stem, because you don't want it rotting, but you just want to make sure that the roots are protected, and then your fruit tree will be a little bit later and it's less risk of frost and there's going to be more pollinators, so you'll get more fruit. So that's my top tip of the day. And finally, on to the shocking thing I've learned about garlic. Now, I almost don't want to do this part because this really gets people triggered. I would say 90% of the people I've told about my shocking garlic discovery get really, really triggered. But, I'm just going to deliver the information and it's up to you whether you get triggered or considered. Now, of course, we all know about the good properties of garlic. It's antimicrobial, antibacterial. It's basically nature's antibiotic, and it does amazing things in the body. And also, if you are doing the Korean natural farming, you use it as a pesticide. That's a little bit of a clue. The shocking discovery about garlic is that it's actually pretty toxic. I was researching the Bob Beck protocol and I watched one of his talks, and randomly, halfway through it, he started talking about garlic, and he found that when he was monitoring his test subjects, if they'd eaten garlic at lunchtime, when he put them through an encephalograph, they were showing up as brain dead. And in the end, it was skewing his results so much, he had to get people to sign a release that they would not eat garlic during the trial. And he researched it more, and it turns out that garlic, if it gets directly into your blood supply, it can kill you. Apparently in World War I and II, the soldiers used to smear garlic across their bullets so that if they just winged the opposition, just winging them with a garlic-covered bullet was enough to kill them, which I was really quite shocked about. And also, pilots in the war were told not to eat garlic 72 hours before flying because it would drastically reduce their reaction times. So I was really quite shocked at this. So I thought, no, it can't be. And then the more I started to research, the more I started to discover. And of course, there are many cultures who do not eat garlic. And I do remember years ago reading that the Chinese viewed garlic as a very powerful medicine, garlic and onions as very powerful medicine. They didn't consider them to be everyday food. And that has always been in the back of my mind. So I have been careful with it. And if you think about it, many medicinal plants do have the good side where they do what you need them to do, but there is often times a toxicity with them, and actually any medicine, if you think about it, there's the good and the toxic side. So in the end, after 20 years, Bob Beck, doing all of his research, hired Stanford University with his own money, and they discovered that yes, it is a neurotoxin and it desynchronizes the brain, which is why a lot of the cultures that don't eat garlic don't eat it, because they say it makes meditation difficult and it interrupts your spiritual connection, which is why they don't eat it. And when I was living in Spain, our local organic store was called Maharishi's, and they would not sell garlic. They did acquiesce with onion, but no matter how much we asked, they would not sell garlic. They just would not do it. And at the time, I remember thinking, oh, this is ridiculous. Just because you don't eat it, why can't we buy it? But now I know why. I mean, they didn't say, no, we're not going to sell garlic because we know it's going to give you brain damage. They didn't mention that part. Then I would have researched it sooner. But it's very fascinating. Now, I know I personally do not do well with raw garlic and raw onions, so I tend to avoid those. But what I haven't been able to discover, trying to research this a bit more, is how much cooking destroys the compound, which is sulfone hydroxyl ion. So this compound gets through the blood-brain barrier, and Bob Beck in his talk said, garlic does as much brain damage as 6 martinis. But thankfully, we have billions and billions of brain cells, so, most people get away with it. But yeah, his encephalographs were showing people after they'd eaten garlic in their lunch, even a tiny bit on their salad, they were showing up as brain dead. I find that really, really shocking. So this has really triggered everyone I've told. It's like I've spat on the holy grail of natural remedies. So please don't send me any studies on the good sides of garlic. I've had people just enraged sending me PubMed studies and goodness knows what else. It's like, I know, I've been using garlic medicinally for probably 30 or 40 years. And the one thing I have growing on my allotment right now is probably about 200 garlic. So, I'm not happy about this either. But I'm very curious, so I'm going to test it. I'm going to have the whole of March where I don't have any garlic, onions, chives, leek, not even wild garlic in my diet. Now, although I didn't think I eat much, when I've gone through the fridge, which is why I'm not doing this till March, it's in everything from the tapenade to my pate to the olives. It's in the kimchi. I'm eating a lot more garlic than I'd realised. So I'll be very interested to see what difference, whether I notice improvement in memory, whether there's a difference in headaches, whatever. I'm going to test it and see a whole month without any of the allium family and see what happens when I reintroduce it. So that is my March experiment. I'm giving you this information so as education. I'm not saying never use garlic. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater here. If you've got loads of bacteria and parasites, frankly, I'd eat the garlic if I was in that situation. You just got to do it with knowledge and decide, if it's something that may be affecting. So maybe cooking it, maybe that takes that compound out, and maybe I can carry on with my garlic buttered mushrooms, because mushrooms without garlic, I'm not enjoying them. Anyway, so there we go. I hope this episode has been educational. And I hope you're not too triggered about the garlic. And if you are, keep it to yourself. Don't shoot the messenger. Until next time, take care. Bye-bye.